Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Poland has just staged its largest ever Armed Forces Day Parade, showcasing a military transformation built around new tanks, artillery, air defense drones, and fifth-generation F-35 fighters. But impressive hardware is only part of combat power. The real test is whether Poland can integrate, crew, supply, and sustain it in wartime. Joining us today on TVP World to assess how strong Poland's military really is Damian Ratka, senior editor at Defense 24, a specialist in military technology and modernization. He closely follows Poland's armored forces, procurement programs, as well as evolving defense capabilities. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good day to you, sir.
So the Armed Forces Day celebration is quite a spectacle, but beyond all of that, how much stronger are the Polish armed forces today compared to what they were before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Yes, indeed. In the recent years, Polish armed forces made incredible modernization progress, both in terms of technical aspects, so procurement of new equipment, new weapon systems, but also changing the training system, also slowly but steadily changing organizational structures. So there is a lot of going on behind the scenes, behind the procurement of weapon systems only.
All right, like I mentioned, procurement of weapon is something that is more kind of surface level. We can see Poland acquiring things like Abrams, K2s, K9s, F-35s. But is there a gap between all these hardware and then the know-how to use them and the integration? How does that translate into genuine combat-ready capability?
Yes, so besides procuring weapon systems, or rather procuring with the weapon systems, is also the procurement of the training system. So, for example, the land forces are incorporating the American training system for the vehicle crews, like the tanks, infantry fighting vehicles. Of course, it's not incorporating the American training system one-to-one, but rather using it as inspiration for its own new common training system for the vehicle crews. Of course, training system is also evolving for the infantry, like, for example, using drones or fighting in the trenches. So slowly but steadily, everything is modernized, from the equipment to the training system. It's also important to note that 2026 is one of the milestones for the Polish Armed Forces modernization efforts, because at the end of the 2026, a lot of procurement programs will be completed. For example, procurement of the Abrams tanks, as per known schedule, should be completed by the end of this year. So as we can see, a lot of is going on here in the Land Forces Department, but also Air Forces Department. The Air Forces are right now in the beginning of receiving of the F-35 fighter jets. We are also preparing the modernization of the F-16s. We are ongoing procurement of the Fa-50 light fighters from the Republic of Korea. And also there is a lot of procurement plans for the support aircraft, like, for example, flying tankers.
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier that when it comes to procurement of training, it doesn't always mean that we're just copying, for example, the American system one-on-one. And one of the good example, I think, here is how Poland is operating both the Abrams and the K2 tanks on a large scale as well. Now, what are some of the military advantages of that approach, or do you think that would create some sort of logistical problem?
When it comes to logistics, the Polish army found a solution. This is done by the way that a specific weapon system is contained in a specific division. So, for example, Abrams tanks are used only by the 18th Mechanized Division, while the K2s are used only by the 16th Mechanized Division. So the logistics systems are contained within these divisions for a specific weapon system. When it comes for training, as I said, there will be a common training system for all vehicle crews based on the American system. But as I said also, it won't be a copy one-to-one of the American system. It will be modified and adjusted for the realities of the Polish armed forces.
And one of the things I'm also curious about is how we've seen Ukraine has fundamentally changed how modern armor is being used with additions of drones taking out tanks as well. Do you think Poland is building the right kind of heavy force for the battlefield of the next decade?
Yes, this is because, well, it might not be a politically correct, but in reality, Ukraine war is a war of poor. So the way they are fighting there, the Ukrainians and to some extent also Russians, is because they do not have a certain capabilities or they do not have the economic power to procure certain weapon systems and create a fighting force capable to do things the way they should be done. In the Polish army right now, there is that effort to completely change the organizational structures of the, for example, mechanized, motorized, and tank battalions. So from the Model 58 that is right now used, the Polish army will move to the so-called Model 44. In the Model 44, the battalion will be reduced from 58 combat vehicles to 44 combat vehicles. But this will give the Polish army some advantages. First advantages is that, for example, from the same pool of vehicles we have or we will procure, we can form more battalions. So, for example, when it comes to 18th Mechanized Division, as an example, with the current procurement of vehicles of the Abrams tanks and the organization structure of the tank battalions, we can form 6 tank battalions. With the Model 44, we'll be able to form 8 tank battalions, and each tank battalion will have also a company of unmanned systems that will provide both reconnaissance and also long-range strike capabilities. So this is one thing. Other thing is that, and this is the information from the MOD I received some time ago, the Polish army is right now preparing procurement of active protection systems for combat vehicles. So for tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and also armored personnel carriers, maybe in future also for other vehicles. Active protection systems will provide protection also against FPV drones. This is one of the requirements. And how it works, the active protection system detects incoming threat, and either jams its guidance system, or it will simply destroy it before it will hit the target. So a protected vehicle by that system. So there is a lot of work done by the MOD and the Polish army to prepare the armed forces for the confrontation with the old threats and also with the new threats like the drones. So, for example, besides the active protection systems, the ground forces will also receive the sun protection system against drones. This will be a bit different system than the active protection systems. It will be designed around the idea to protect not individual vehicles, but the ground forces formations or military installations.
Right, it does sound like Poland has been thinking this through and built out a very well-rounded system. One of the things we also notice is how Poland is building a very formidable artillery and long-range fire as well. But do you think that means we also have to expand the ammunition production or things like ammunition procurement so we don't just have a bunch of guns and run out of bullets to shoot?
Okay, so here we need some explanation because this is often not very well communicated by the MOD. So when we procure the artillery systems, from example from Republic of Korea, we are also procuring ammunition with these systems. We are also procuring ammunition from our allies for other systems, like, for example, Krab self-propelled howitzer that is manufactured in Poland by HSW. However, the separate program is to increase manufacturing capabilities of different types of ammunitions within the Polish industry. So these are separate programs. So on the one hand, Polish MOD is procuring ammunition for the Polish armed forces, and this ammunition is being delivered. But you need to remember that the ammunition deliveries and also how much ammunition we are procuring, how much ammunition we have in our stocks, this is classified information, and nobody besides the army and the MOD knows how much we have. And the separate thing is that the Polish arms manufacturers are increasing their capabilities to manufacture the ammunition. There are new ammunition plants being built. The existing ammunition plants are being modernized. Of course, this is a process that needs some time, but we are going through this process. This is happening right now. When it will be completed, of course, the ammunition manufacturing capability in Poland will increase significantly.
Right, and speaking of a process that's going to need time, we see so many new weapons entering service simultaneously. And of course, you mentioned there's also procurement of training as well. But do you think experienced manpower is going to become some sort of constraint or bottleneck for Poland's military expansion other than hardware?
Well, politicians are saying that they are not considering returning to the conscription. However, due to my own experience in the army, I stand on the, on that point that at some point, the government or politicians in general will need to admit that, yes, we need to return to some form of conscription service. How this conscription service will look like, we don't know yet. I suspect that the general staff is working on possible solutions to that problem. I think that there are several countries in Europe that can be a very good example, like, for example, Finland. A lot of people forget that a lot of countries in Europe, a lot of armies in Europe are based on conscription, like, for example, Finland. A lot of countries are considering returning to conscription service or are right now returning to conscription service. So Poland will probably return to that. When, how, these are the questions I do not have answer right now, and I believe that the army and the MOD also do not have the right answers right now, but they are working on it quietly and preparing for that right moment to start that discussion nationwide.
Right, so there is still some uncertainty up ahead, but looking at these procurement right now, it is safe to say that Poland is gearing itself up for any sort of circumstances. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.